Personal finance was not a thing in India. 91, the country opened up. The Outlook office was halfway nearer to my home, and I had a very small baby that time. So you give up on a big brand name like Economic Times just so that you're closer to home and closer to the baby. Okay, so that's how strange coincidences in your life end up in life-changing directions. I was probably one of the first people in the media to figure the genre out. Took to it like a fish takes to water. That journey, when it began, also along the way told me how little I knew. From the CEO, it took the attention to the average person, to the average middle-class Indian who pays the taxes, who stands in a line, who gets really jacked over all the time.
Monika, there's this myth. Indian women really don't know what's really about, they can't handle personal finance and manage money.
Then don't worry your pretty head about it, which is what girls are told. You are giving your power away by saying that I have no head for numbers. Okay, suffer.
Where the hell is the market headed?
Aspiration for the country should be, we should all be rich. Why do we all want to be poor? I mean, think about it. Read something you violently disagree with and then argue it out yourself. Please understand that the millionaires and the billionaires have less than 5% of their net worth in crypto. And you are putting 100% of your money in crypto.
So good evening and welcome to yet another edition of Thinkly Talks. I'm super excited to have with us Monika Halan, a renowned financial expert, author and journalist. Monika has had a stellar career as a columnist, journalist and editor with marquee names like Mint, Economic Times, Indian Express, Outlook and Business Today. She's currently also the chairperson for SEBI's advisory committee for IPEF, that's Investor Protection and Education Fund. And she's also an adjunct professor and Yale World Fellow 2011. She's well known for her best-selling books, Let's Talk Money, and then Let's Talk Mutual Funds. And a recent book, we just came out, a few weeks back, I think, it's Let's Talk Legacy, right? So with that, Monika, a warm welcome to you. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much. Very excited to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. Absolutely delighted.
Likewise. And there's just so much to cover. Let's try and see how much we can unpack in this session over the next 40 odd minutes. So I think before anything else, Monika, would just love to hear about your journey. I mean, how do you get into financial journalism and why the specific passion and interest towards personal finance and literacy?
Career choices are made for very strange reasons, and my entire association with personal finance is due to one of those choices. They had a specific product for investors. A new magazine was launching called Intelligent Investor. This was going to be India's first personal finance magazine. The year is 1997. Personal finance was not a thing in India. You had tip sheets, you had stock market predictors. But, 91, the country opened up, the economy opened up. Retail finance had just sort of begun. And the Outlook promoter had this idea that he wanted to bring personal finance journalism to India. So for a variety of personal reasons, I shifted from Economic Times to this unknown thing called Intelligent Investor, something called personal finance. And just to share, especially with the women out there, the decision really was that the Outlook office was halfway nearer to my home and I had a very small baby that time. Okay, so this was a young mother trying to keep it all together. So you give up on a big brand name like Economic Times just so that you're closer to home and closer to the baby. Okay, so that's how strange coincidences in your life end up in life-changing directions. That office, there was something unique for 1997. I had a computer to myself with an internet connection. Can you believe that?
Wow.
In 1997, okay? So the young people have no idea what it means for my generation to have an internet connection on my computer, right? So that is the time I began to sort of search global sites for what is this thing called personal finance. And I think I am not wrong when I say I was probably one of the first people in the media to figure the genre out. People were doing business journalism, but I took to it like a fish takes to water, and I understood it. I got into its DNA, and that began the journey. And that journey, when it began, also along the way told me how little I knew. So then I got certified. I did more courses. I did my CFP. I studied. I failed. I studied again. But essentially what it told me is that this is the part of the market that very few people focus on in terms of either media or policy. Policy had no idea of how the retail investor thinks. So I found really a fallow field, a virgin territory before me, where nobody had really done anything in India as such in the space of personal finance. And I got very interested because from the CEO, it took the attention to the average person, to the average middle class Indian who pays the taxes, who stands in a line, who gets really jacked over all the time. So this became sort of our story as a collective of we all identify as middle class Indians. We've all had this experience of having this post 91 wave lift us all on the economic wave. And then, to document those stories, what it means to a generation which has benefited from economic reform, from growth. So, so many threads come out of that in terms of understanding what growth can do to your personal lives, your mindset, your relationships with money, and how important growth is for an economy. And again, to tell the young people out there who might be fascinated by socialism, but lived socialism is evil. My generation has lived through it. You don't want to go there. It's not romantic. It's horrible. So please go for growth. Go for capitalism with a soul, with a heart, more the Europe way than the American way, but definitely free markets over state control. Sorry, very long answer going all over the place.
Perfect. I'm just hanging on to your words, and
that's the story.
Very apt. Lovely, lovely story. And I really like the way you talked about saying that, when you focus on personal finance, the protagonist of the story was no longer the CEO or the industrialist or the deal maker, right? I mean, it's really the average Joe on the street, right? The person who's really struggling.
It's Mr. Jain on the street. Yeah,
absolutely. So, Monika, there's this myth that, women, Indian women really don't know what's really about, they can't handle personal finance and manage money. Yet we have in our country, some really top-notch journalists like Sucheta Dalal, like, Shireen Bhan, yourself. We have some great, celebrated bankers like Shikha Sharma, Chandra Kochar. I mean, with and without the controversy, but, I mean, she was a powerhouse in herself, right? And then, of course, the country's money is managed by a lady finance minister, which is, Mrs. Nirmala
and
Sitharaman.
The SEBI chief is a woman.
And the SEBI chief is a woman, absolutely. Correct. So I'm saying, this narrative, do you think there is any truth to it, or is it just random stereotyping that we always see?
I think it's random stereotyping, definitely. Also, I think the roots are fairly deep in the way that our society is built up, where girls typically, traditionally, have been kept out of the family assets discussion, household expenses. But so that decision is in hundreds and thousands. But when that decision is in lakhs and crores, she is not consulted. Her views are not taken. She doesn't know where the assets are. Especially in business families, the assets go down the male line. I don't know how to put it in a nicer way, but that is true. So, of course, there are families where that is not the case. Of course, there are families where in large business families, girls are given their equal share. And we are seeing that happen in one of the biggest business families where there is equality of asset distribution between the male and the female children. But however, I would say in 95% of the cases, girls are kept out of the asset discussion. So if she doesn't know what the assets are, she will not ask for her share. So I think it's a little more insidious than don't worry your pretty head about it, which is what girls are told. And I'm still shocked at the responses that I get from women when they ask you what you do, and it's a killer of a conversation if you say that you understand markets, you understand finance, and that's what you do. The reaction really is, oh, I don't know anything about it. Like, what a dirty thing you do, almost like, is there something to be do? Really, you worry about money. How gross. So it's a killer of an evening. And I'm surprised that it's women who are doing it. Men, of course, want a stock tip or a mutual fund tip. That's a different conversation.
Yeah.
But 9 out of 10 women will say, I know nothing about it. I don't really want to bother about things like money. I have none of it. She's covered in jewelry. And she's saying, I don't have any money. So either you are frozen in fright or you have no sense of self-preservation, lady. Yeah. That you are giving your power away by saying that I have no head for numbers. Okay, suffer, So it is both. So women who understand it, go for it. They go and grab the opportunity. They manage the household finances, investments. They're a participant. And there is the bulk of them believe in the nonsense that they were brought up on, that money is not something you bother your pretty little head about it. So it's your femininity which comes in the way of getting the money power. So yeah, it's both ways. Society has built like that, and women have sort of believed it so deeply that they throw it away.
They almost shun it in some ways, right? Yeah. I think great answer. But moving along, and there's one thing I wanted to ask you ever since I knew you were coming on in the community, is like, where the hell is the market headed? I mean, help us out. Pray tell us. Nifty is at 24,000, Sensex touching almost 80,000.
80,000. Yeah. Okay.
And sorry, I just to stay on with the thought. A lot of people say, when you talk to people, on different sides, and people say that, listen, it's not getting overheated. The market is just getting restructured. India's, coming up out there. But then I look at stuff like the trailing PE ratio across markets, and India's more expensive, when you compare it, let's say, our Nifty is at around 23. But if you look at, let's say, S&P, it's at around 22. NASDAQ, of course, is 33, but that's a different asset class of, companies out there, right? And so it seems to be very expensive, but we'd just love your thoughts on it. Just drill on this point.
So I'm going to do and, go back into time and tell you that my first job was in 1991, as far back as that. It was in Business Today. And the stock market scam was just about to burst, 1992. Markets were at 2,000 Sensex. The value was 2,000 and it doubled to 4,000. And that is the time everyone says it's overheated, it will crash. And so it did. And it's remained crashed for many years. And then economic growth happens. 91 was the year of the big reform, and it happened. Over my 30-year career, I have followed markets. I have done this work. Every time there's a milestone, 4,000, 10,000, 15, 20, 25, 30, 40, 50, 60. This is exactly the comment that I have heard. Markets are overheated. They are too high. I don't understand what too high means as compared to what. Will it reach a lakh? And my answer is, I don't know if it will reach a lakh, but if we continue to grow, then why will it not reach a lakh in time, right? In terms of the growth trajectory. I'm giving you the history of the market over 30 years from an index value of 2,000 to today almost 80,000. So that's part one, that investors must remember that driven by economic growth, stock markets will reflect that. Indices, not individual stocks, not sector, will grow to reflect that growth. Should India's growth peter out, okay, and there are no guarantees on growth. Should India's growth peter out, it doesn't look like it's going to happen, but who knows? If it peters out, it is bad news for the markets. But should we continue to grow on this growth trajectory, there is no reason for long-term markets to fall. Long-term, please understand long-term.
Sure.
Should the markets drop by 10% next week?
Possibly.
Absolutely. Who knows? I have no idea what they do short-term, but over the long term, the markets typically will give you inflation. So GDP growth plus inflation. So if GDP is 7, inflation is 5, 4 or 5, that's your base level number for your index growth. How do you deal with this question of, are markets overvalued? Don't look at the market, don't look at your own asset allocation. So you have to look, if you want to approach equity markets, it is a science. You have to follow the rules. If you want to go swimming, please learn how to swim. Don't go to the deep end before you learn to swim. You have to keep the power in your hands to decide when to sell. You don't look at the index value. You don't even look at the PE number. You're doing long-term investing through either mutual funds or index investing. This is your 90% of your retail investors. If you're doing FNO, if you're doing day trading, if you're doing individual, that's your risk, that's your problem. My rules are about either index investing or mutual fund picking so that you're diversified. Power in your hands is to fix your asset allocation. What is that? Between debt and equity. If you fit at 60-40, 60% equity and 40% debt, a runaway market will take it to 70-30. That is the time that you rebalance, which means you sell the winning asset class and you buy the one which is lagging. Right? So that's your cue, your asset allocation ratio, which you have decided is your cue to sell, not the PE ratio, not the index value. So constantly you have to follow the rules of the market to make money long term. So this is how I would react to this question of, are markets overvalued? I have no idea. I don't care. I'm looking at my asset allocation, and I do. When I see, for example, within equity, there's been a run up in certain segments of the market. So within equity, if there's an asset, there has to be an asset allocation between large, mid, small cap. If you've seen your small cap allocation go beyond what you had decided, you have to put the greed aside, sell part of it to come back to your original desired asset allocation. So constantly remember that the power is in your hand to decide when to get out. And I'm not saying sell your entire port. See, you are not a trader.
Yeah.
You are only rebalancing your portfolio. You are not buying and selling. You are not a speculator. You are not a trader. You are a long-term investor. So it comes to the question of me asking my audiences to say, ask a spiritual question. Who am I? Am I a trader? Am I a speculator? Am I an investor? And there are very specific roles for each of them in a stock market. So you've got to decide who you are before you act.
No, great points, Monika. And on this, some of the younger members of the team really wanted me to ask you, and my daughter especially, because she started working last year, and then around 6 months back, she told me, like, Papa, I want to invest. And I checked with my financial planner. He said, look, I think the market's going to come down. It's at 22,000. It's really heated up. It's going to come down. So let's just wait for a while. And 6 months later, the market's at 24,000, And my daughter's saying that, Dad, you're not going to let me enter the market. So the question is, for somebody who's just starting right now, they just got the first check-in, they're looking at building up the portfolio, they've not really done any major asset allocation. How should they think about it? In a market which seems to be like, like I said, the word on the street seems to sound like it's very expensive. I know what you made were some very, very relevant points, but how should a newbie look at it?
If we get corporate growth earning, your PE ratio will change in no time. Your valuation will change. So who can predict that? We don't know. Now, should that ratio change, you would agree that the whole story would change.
Right.
The biggest risk to your daughter is not being in the market.
Yep.
She's got the runway. She's got the age to stay invested. She's not investing 1 crore. She's probably doing a SIP of 20,000, 25,000. She has the investing road ahead to see that 25 erode to 15,000. But if she gets into a systematic investment plan, should the markets drop by that much, that 25,000 next month will buy much more. So her risk is not being in this market.
All right, great. So I need to go get that started now for her.
Yeah. Absolutely. She needs to read my book, Let's Talk Money. And she needs to definitely, I would say, build her emergency fund first. That's really important. And especially for girls, it gets you out of toxic places, both at home. I'm not saying that yours is a toxic home, but a lot of little homes could become toxic sometimes.
Yeah.
It gives you that ability to stand on your feet. That emergency fund also helps you get out of toxic workplaces. So for girls, absolutely very important, like don't forego on that emergency fund. And then side by side, you start your long-term investing as well. Even $5,000 will really, because of the runway ahead for her, it really will count.
I think this is resonating a lot with some of the younger people in the audience right now. So I'll pick up those questions in a bit, Monika. But, coming to the point of today's discussion, we touched, really the topic being about India's growth and the increasing inequality that's happening out there.
Dispute that immediately anyway.
No, lovely. And I would love to hear your points. And I'm sure that'll make for some great, reels and, out there. But, what do you really think about that? There's a lot of talk about the two sides to the aisle, right? One which is really just focused on growth. And they're saying that eventually, the trickle down will really solve for most of the problem that you have. There's the other side, which is really talking about, they keep looking at the wealth distribution. They keep talking about redistribution of wealth and some of the scary stuff, right? And what's your view on that? Are you completely to one side, or do you think that there should be some level of intervention that needs to happen? And then I have a very specific question to you, but I'll come down to that.
If we are agreed that there will be inequality. First of all, do we believe, first principles, that a society, a nation, the world can be fully equal? Do we believe that we are all exactly equal? Is that possible?
No.
I'm asking you. No. So my first principle is there is going to be inequality, both income and wealth. So this is something, especially the young people, need to internalize, that it's a utopian social argument that there should be equality. We are born different. We are given different opportunities. We will have different outcomes. It is up to the state to mitigate some of those inequalities and allow people who have had a bad luck in terms of where they were born, what kind of resources they got, to make up, right? But you know of very poor people getting very rich. We also know of very rich people getting very poor. So that much of inequality is going to be there because we are all different. The second is we need to look at inequality in terms of data and not anecdotes.
Right.
We need to pick a data point which is given to us by maybe a third party, because you can listen to Piketty and then you can listen to Surjit Bhalla. You will have two different economists giving you two different stories, right? So it's my economist over your economist. I want to look at somebody who's doing poverty porn. That's fine. I can go with that inequality porn. It used to be poverty porn. Now it's inequality porn.
Yeah.
Or I want to go with somebody like Surjit Bhalla, who has made a very convincing case, but there are detractors who say that his analysis is not so correct. But can we then pick something called the World Bank puts out data? Can we agree that that data should be okay? And if I pick the World Bank data, and I'm just going to read out some, so how do you measure inequality? Okay, so one is anecdotal, okay, how many people I see on the road are poor and all that, okay? My anecdote and your anecdote, we can't fight that, but we can only fight on data. There is a concept called a Gini coefficient, which measures income inequality. If the Gini coefficient of a country is 1 or say 100, that means one person has all the wealth and everybody else has nothing. Not possible. If it is a 0, then we are exactly equal. Not possible either. For some reasons, economists agree that a Gini coefficient of 40 is fair. 40 and below is what a country should target. Okay, so that's I've laid out my argument that a Gini coefficient of 40 is and below, the lower you are away from the threshold, the better you are, is considered to be fair. Okay, because we agreed that inequality is there. We cannot not have it. Okay, so I'm going to read out some numbers to you.
Sure.
2011, India's Gini coefficient was 35.4. 2017, it was 35.9. 2019, it was 33. It's falling. And I have non-World Bank data for urban and rural, where urban in 22-23, FY23 was 31.9 and rural was 27. Okay, so I'm showing you a reducing trend of the Gini coefficient, which is measuring income inequality. And I'm going to read out some numbers for 2019, for 2023 of Indonesia, which is 38.3, as opposed to ours of an average of, I think, 25. Brazil is 52. The US is almost 40. Okay, so I'm giving you developed country Gini coefficient and countries like Brazil and Indonesia, who we could possibly compare ourselves to.
Benchmark them.
So I'm giving you data to show that income inequality has fallen in India. This is data reported by the World Bank. Now we can come to another set of data. So the other way to look at it is poverty falling in India? Again, so Niti Aayog says it's below 5. Absolute poverty. State Bank of India has a report which is based on the household consumption expenditure survey, which says it's between 4.5 and 5. There are other, basically IMF, World Bank, ADB have done different reports where we are getting a number of below 10. So even if you don't want to believe Niti Aayog or State Bank of India, that number of poverty is below 10. It used to be between 50 to 60, I think, % in the 1980s. Yeah. Right? So we know poverty has gone down. We know that Gini coefficient is down. Then I give you one more stat. Now this is tax data. This is a 9-year period ending FY21, right? And this is income tax data to show who is paying, what are the income levels like. The cohort, which is between 5.5 to 25 lakh, okay? So we will agree that this is sort of the middle class, right? 5.5 entry level to 25 lakh. This cohort has grown at an average annual rate of 20%. Their incomes in a 9-year period ending 2021 have grown at CAGR, average annual of 20%. Of course, the rich have got richer because they had the assets to do better during COVID.
Sure.
They have done better. But have the number of poor decreased? Yes. Has there been substantial growth in what we call lower middle to middle class? Absolutely, yes. Has the Gini coefficient gone down? Yes. Now, if some economist sitting in Paris uses his own methodology, which many economists dispute, and we have a lot of opinions on how India is more unequal than under the British. We were all poor. You know, in 1947, what our average longevity was. You know how long we lived? 32. That's how long we lived. That's how pathetic it was. You know what it is today? It's 72. So in a place where everybody is poor, of course, there will be less inequality. Nobody has anything. But in a growth economy, you will have more inequality simply because of the larger asset base of a few. But is the rest better off? I don't think we can dispute that. People are better off. Anecdotally, we can see it.
Right.
Data is proving it. So I think this inequality debate is very unfortunate. Like I said at the beginning, in the 60s and 70s, we had filmmakers doing poverty porn out of India. Now it is pure inequality porn. There's no other way to put it. How do you feel better about your life? You point at somebody who you think is doing worse.
Right.
Sorry, I'm a little passionate about it, but
no, I think these are very great points, and I think you sometimes just need to call a spade, right? And I think the problem out here is, like you said, we kind of keep looking at anecdotal. More than anecdotal, it's actually cherry picking of data, cherry picking of anecdotal, evidences, and and of course the politics is the way it is, right?
Absolutely.
And my follow-up question really, which I wanted to ask you was, I saw you on a little bit of a spat with somebody, I don't want to take names, but I think when there was this whole talk just before the elections about the wealth redistribution, so I leave it to you how you want to answer that. But you had some very strong views on the inheritance tax, and then also maybe I'm sure you would have some views on the unrealized gains tax, right? So those kind of stuff. What's your view? It seems very dangerous, right? I mean, the moment you hear party or the other, which could potentially come into power, talking about things like this, which is like really taking you back, into socialism, right? So what's your view on that? And
so there are two students.
How
in
do
the
we
class.
educate the people also?
Oh, so there are two students in the class. One gets 100 on 100 in maths and one gets 60. What do you want to do? You want to take marks away from the 100, give it so that they are both at 80? I mean, I can't put it more simply than that.
Absolutely.
Punishing somebody who has worked hard, who has done what it takes and grown to where they are. And so do you put tuitions for the person at 60? Do you give them additional help, or do you take it away from the 100-mark student? That's all. You people need to decide for yourselves. What path do we need to take as a country? Do we want to incentivize merit, or do we want a country where you distribute so much there's no incentive for growth left? Look, you can't distribute if you don't have growth. Absolutely. There's nothing to distribute. That's why we were poor. There was nothing to distribute. How are we redistributing? India's rich have some of the highest marginal tax rates in the world, one of the highest. Okay, it's not the highest, but it will come in the top quartile of tax rates. The rich are taxed at almost, I think, 42% on their margin. The assets, typically the stock market assets, are taxed over and over again.
Yeah.
Dividend is already taxed. You put your tax paid money into the stock, the company pays their profits, your dividends in your hands are taxed at your marginal rate.
Right.
So you're taxed almost 3 times for the profit that you're making. How much more tax can you do? And then what is it that the government does with this money in terms of redistribution? We have the free food program. Okay, so it's been an inherently poor country. How do you ensure that people at least they survive? You give them food to eat. So that free food for the last few years, it started in COVID, that allows the rest of the income to go for medical expenses, for education, whatever else has to be spent. At least that basic nutrition for the family is done. So we need to have growth. We need to have very rich, a vibrant middle class, a well-off middle class. And the aspiration for the country should be, we should all be rich. Why do we all want to be poor? I mean, think about it. What do you want to distribute? Poverty or wealth? To distribute wealth, we should all have wealth. So that's my views. I think it's a very dangerous path.
I know. And, I think election time and the virtue signaling to the constituents, and I mean, that's how it kind of goes about. But there's a point here from Siddhi saying that, are there any lessons that India can learn from some some, let's say, benchmark countries where they've probably done a good job of, let's say, balancing this out.
Some of the countries are the size of maybe Bandra or Delhi.
So Singapore and Dubai
yeah,
and all will be like,
right. So it's very, very good when you have a population size of a few million people.
Right.
To solve something at the scale, the diversity, the complexity of a subcontinent, I don't think we can cut paste. I think we need our own solutions. I think we need to, for example, look at what we did in COVID.
Right.
The world was telling us, economists were writing op-eds saying, spend 10% of your GDP. We don't have 10% of our GDP to spend. Because the minute we do that, our fiscal deficit, which means the government's borrowing over its revenue, goes up. And when that goes up, we become unstable. I don't want to go into what happens then. But essentially, what will happen is that you will become economically unstable as a country. We didn't have the money. Although we were being asked to cut paste in terms of spending. The Ministry of Finance took a view that when there's a lockdown, there's nowhere to really spend also, right? So you can't boost consumption when the economy is halted.
Right.
So the intervention that India made was food. You did not want people starving to death when their employment was taken away. Migrants went back. It was a disaster, right? For especially the poor people. So our intervention was very different from what the rest of the world, developed world, did. India gave food, and we need solutions like that. We need to do it for a country the size of India and not cut paste Finland.
Yeah, I think there were enough op-eds, like you said, we needed quantitative easing, we needed PPP, and, so do you think sometimes that we don't do a good job of telling a story? I mean, sometimes, all that you've talked about right now, very relevant points, but somehow, we have this whole stuck in the 70s, 80s, socialism, the whole thing about stuff like wealth distribution, stuff like that fact we should just simply ape the West, right? Why are we not able to get out of that? Have you ever thought about it?
I think people need to start thinking for themselves. They need to stop consuming anecdotal evidence. They need to stop consuming views which don't stand an argument. So look for yourself, decide for yourself, read across. So what we tend to do is we tend to read or watch things which agree with our political views. Go outside.
Echo chambers in that sense.
Go to the echo chambers. Read something else. Read something you violently disagree with, and then argue it out yourself.
Right.
We need to do first principle thinking, each one of us, because otherwise we're in very, very shaky territory.
Great. So with this, I would like to move across to two of your passionate, areas. One is, of course, financial literacy, and the second is want to touch upon the books you've authored. But speaking on the first point on financial literacy, again, there are two opposing views on that. There's one view which says that, listen, government's job is not to intervene when it comes to an adult making his own decisions, right? When it comes to tobacco, drinking, investing in bitcoins, just stay clear of it because he's an adult. Let the person do his reading and let the person decide, right? And on the other side of the aisle, you'll have people who say that, listen, it is very much, the citizen doesn't know what he's doing. He's to be monitored. Let's put this, the cancer, warning on the cigarette tax. Let's tell them how they should invest. Let's stop these kind of assets, and so on and so forth, right? So walk us through your thought process on that, and is there any merit on both sides, or are you strongly on one side or the other?
So I'll stay with finance. I don't want to get into cigarettes and alcohol.
No, I was just using that as a metaphor.
No, but those are extremely important things to think through. That if I want to put something in my body, what is the government? So just one line: the government worries because the healthcare costs will come onto their head. It's a societal cost in terms of man hours lost due to sickness, ill health, and addiction.
Sure.
Plus, a lot of this will come on to the state medical system to deal with. So yes, the state has to worry about such things which are harmful to us. Okay, any excess of anything. So, but let's come to finance. I'm going to do a little bit of deep dive here. So a financial product is invisible, right? It is created in your mind when the person selling it describes it. It's not a car that you can kick the tires, look at the paint and look at all that and look at what it does and decide. The moment of truth of a financial product in a pension product is 40 years later. In an insurance policy is when the disaster happens. It's too late. The moment of truth is too late. So when I'm buying, I need to know. But the seller of the product will always know more, and it's not in his interest to tell me the bad points of the product. Our markets are based on something called free markets, right? So free markets believe it's buyer beware.
Yep.
We found that buyer beware doesn't work in finance because the deal is very complicated. There is too much fine print, and the person selling will benefit himself rather than the customer. So the way to solve that has been investor education. Look, if we were in a seller beware world, I don't need financial education.
Yeah.
Because then the onus is on the seller to ensure that I have a fair outcome, not that I make money, but I get a suitable product. So in a seller beware market, I don't need financial literacy. In a buyer beware market, disclosure on which free market rests is not enough. I need the next crutch of financial education and literacy, so that people at least are able to answer questions that they might have about the product. One feedback that I have got after Let's Talk Money, the book is now 6 years old. It's still selling. It's still there on the airports. Every day, I still get 2 messages from readers saying, it's changed my life. Thank you so much. Several of them have said that after reading the chapter on health insurance, they were able to sit across the agent and ask questions. And the agent was surprised at how much they knew, and they got a better deal. My idea through the books has been not to give you a solution, but to empower you to ask questions, which I think is the way financial literacy has to be done, because every story is different, every family is different. You know yourself the best. So if you're equipped with some basic knowledge, then you can use that to get a better deal. So that's the way I look at financial education and literacy. I want us to move to a market where we don't need it.
Right. So, you talked about the book, Stock Money, and, it's really about the fact that, how do you empower people, right? And then you obviously double down, Let's Talk Mutual Fund and your latest book.
Right.
Why don't you walk us through, your thoughts around what you're trying to address in all of them? The second one is obviously a little more clear, but still.
That's right. So Let's Talk Money, I had just left throwaway line saying that after I finished the mutual fund chapter, it was very long. I said, I think this deserves a book by itself. I wrote it and I forgot. My readers did not let me forget. They went on pinging me on social media, mailing me saying, where is that book? And I didn't write it for many years. I think I wrote it after 5 years. The book came out last year. And it's sort of on reader demand that book was written. That please understand the product that you're investing in. Again, I will not give you 5 funds, but I will empower you to choose. I'll give you a methodology which you can use. Because look, if I give you 5 funds, I need you to come back to me every 6 months and pay me something for advice.
Right.
But if I'm empowering you, it's that giving you a fish and teaching you fishing. If I empower you to make that choice, then you can do it year after year yourself. So that's sort of been my ideal road. That can I empower you so that you can do this on your own? And then Let's Talk Legacy. I must show you.
I saw your video on that said that this is one book where the writers have to put in a lot more effort than you have.
The readers, yes, because
the readers have to.
It's actually a diary. So if you can see, it's got I have written very little. It's actually
more like a workbook that you
It's a journal, it's a workbook, it's a diary. So what happens is that I look after finances in my house, obviously. And one of my fears for many years has been that if something happens to me, my family will have no idea, because I know the passwords, I know everything. So I have been documenting for a very long time in a systematic manner, the entire financial life, the passwords, everything.
Wow.
And then the CEO of HarperCollins, he suggested, why don't you convert this into something that everybody can use? Because we all intend to do it, but we never get down to it. We don't know what to document. We don't know how to do it. So why don't you do this in a diary format? And I was a little hesitant saying that, I don't want my readers to feel cheated that I haven't written anything. But he said, I think readers will see value. And I think that is happening. The feedback that I'm getting, people are saying this is something which actually will initiate conversations, intergenerational conversations. Because it's very difficult to go to your parents and say, have you written a will? Right? Because they will ask you, you want us to die? No, we don't want you to die. But could you document your financial life? Because the unclaimed deposits with banks, insurance companies run into thousands of crores.
Right.
I think 60% of civil disputes in courts are family property disputes.
Right.
So do you really want to create assets which are then disputed? Why don't you just document it and leave a clear roadmap for the next, whoever it is who is in your family? So that's been the idea behind Let's Talk Legacy. And also, I must tell you that I began writing it for the family, but I find myself using it twice a week at least. Some password, some username. You can't, we have more than 50 relationships. Netflix will have one, Hotstar will have one. There'll be 2 Wi-Fis in the house. There'll be one LPG, one electricity. You have, other than finance, including finance, there'll be about 50 relationships that an average middle class household will have.
Fascinating. Yeah.
How do you ever remember? So your default is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 password. That's not safe.
Right.
And I'm a technology buff. I probably used ChatGPT before anybody else did, just because I'm curious.
Right.
But I don't want to put my finance data on the cloud. I'm afraid of it being hacked. So therefore, I like a physical diary, which I can put under lock and key, under my supervision. So one of the criticism of the book is, but we can do it online. Of course you can, but does your family know where to find that Excel sheet? Do they know the password of your computer?
Right.
The answer most times is no. But should they discover this book in your locker, would it be useful? Absolutely yes, right?
I'm going to go back home today and tell my mom that the little black book in which she maintains all the passwords, she's doing a smart thing,
Yeah,
Monika does that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And do give
But
her
tell
a
me-
copy of this book.
Well, definitely.
Yeah.
But tell me, I'm very curious, the diary that you maintain all your passwords and all your secret, pins and everything, who has the password to the locker in which you keep the diary?
No, I keep it at home. So
Yeah.
my husband knows where it is.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I was just
Yeah,
kidding.
no. But it actually is a very important question, no? I can document it and I need not tell you.
Right.
But so the idea is you document and you tell.
Right.
In fact, you involve your
The
family
people around. Yeah.
in the documentation process itself. In that process, they will also learn, because otherwise, they are lost. They don't know what it is. So
True.
involve them when you're filling the book, involve them in filling the book. So
Lovely. I
it's
think
very, very important. Yeah.
Great. There's a question here from Narayan, who is a financial planner, and he's just asking that are life insurance products in the best interest of buyers? Straight question.
Pure term life insurance, which is insurance without any investment, is absolutely almost the second financial product you build after emergency fund and health insurance. Because if you have dependents, if you're single, if you are rich enough where you don't need, if your household doesn't need your salary, your income to run, then you don't need life insurance. In all other cases where the household depends on your income, you need life insurance. And you need at least 10 times of your annual income.
Right.
And the only product which can do that for you is something called a pure term life insurance. Everything else, bundled, traditional, ULIPs, are completely useless for you. Stay away. They make money for the insurance company. They make money for the agents, the banks, and the investors into the stocks of those insurance companies. For you, the policyholder, you have a bad outcome, because especially the traditional products are built to give you a bad outcome. So I can only say, read the insurance chapter in Let's Talk Money. A lot of people have got prevented from losing their money to insurance because of that chapter. And just Google globally, all financial planners recommend a pure term life insurance plan for life insurance.
Right.
Split the investment and insurance decision. Do not use insurance for investment.
Great. I think that's a great takeaway for everybody who's listening into this or who listen to the recording. Just maybe we're going to be on the hour soon, but just maybe 2 more questions. Question here from Gayatri. She's saying, how do you evaluate the success of SEBI's initiatives over the past few years?
So the disclosure is that I have actually worked with SEBI on different committees for almost 12 to 13 years now. I've had a very long association as an outsider, serving on many, many, many committees. The longest has been the mutual fund committee. And so I understand from both sides of the picture. So they call me because I represent retail investor interest. I have no axe to grind. I don't run a commercial fee for planning. So I am purely in the education space. I'm not associated with any company. So I typically sit in the middle I have no conflict of interest. They find it interesting and useful. So they have involved me as the retail investor's voice in the SEBI committees. So I have had a very close, over the years, I have seen the way SEBI has worked on investor interest. And I have to tell you that they put investor protection and interest at the heart of regulation. They embed it into the product. Mutual funds in India have no front commission. It's the only market in the world. Well, I think Australia also does that, but very, very few markets in the world make the mutual fund product go zero load. So commissions distort investor choices because the agents hard sell those with higher commission. So 2009, India went zero load, zero commission. And then over the years, I have seen the way that they have under the bonnet cleaned the product up. So when we see the systematic investment book at 20,000 crore a month, why is it happening? Because the regulator has cleaned the product. So the investor understands that she is free from the risk of fraud, from monkey business by the fund house mostly. The market risk is on her. But there is a basic, this place is safe to play in. That's the impression that you get, whereas insurance, is not because of the number of complaints. So I think SEBI has done a stellar job. Look, the scamsters will always be 2 steps ahead.
Right.
They will use new technology. They will do all of that. The regulator has been very quick to catch up. And in some cases, gone beyond, done some things to prevent as well. So I think we have one of the best regulated markets in the world, which has given us extremely efficient capital markets.
Great. And my last question really is that what do you really think of these emerging asset classes like crypto and Bitcoin? And what do you think should our approach be towards regulation? Should it again be just buyers beware, or should there be a strong POV? Like we had ETFs that have come out in the US, though
Correct.
For the longest time you thought that they are completely against it. And I was kind of surprised when that happened, right? So in your view, how should we be looking at it?
So unfortunately, the US space is very deeply compromised in terms of their regulatory actions. If you saw the statement of the SEC chair, after he allowed, on a court order, ETFs on Bitcoin, it was the cry saying that I didn't want to do it, but the court forced me.
Yeah.
Why did the court force him? Because he, in his wisdom, allowed futures. If you're allowing futures, for whatever reason, we don't know why he allowed the futures. You're jolly well going to allow ETFs, right? So that's a different story. In many other ways, they are trying to clamp down on the exchanges over there. My only submission in the whole crypto story is that I don't understand what makes it an asset other than demand. If there is a stock, there's an underlying company which makes profits and losses, goods and services. There's a bond, there's a borrower and a lender, and a business transaction. Why does gold? So immediately I will get this gold question. Why does gold have value? Of course, there's jewelry, right? But most viable countries' central banks have, all viable countries' central banks have gold as a reserve. The day that a viable country, I'm not talking of El Salvador, but a viable country central bank allows in Bitcoin as a reserve, then data would have changed and I will change my mind and say Bitcoin is an asset, right? But till that time, till I don't see an underlying asset, I hesitate to call it an asset. So treat it like a punt, a lottery. And also a lot of young people get swayed by global investors who have these assets. Please understand that the millionaires and the billionaires have less than 5% of their net worth in crypto. And you are putting 100% of your money in crypto.
Yeah.
So the people who are hyping up some of these assets have their money in US treasuries, have their money in stocks, have their money partly in gold, and have 1% of their net worth in crypto. And you are putting all of your money into this. So should you want to put 10 rupees out of 100, 5 rupees, go ahead. Should you be putting 100 out of your 100 in this? No.
Great, Monika. I mean, this was a very, very lovely nuanced answer. Something that I was looking forward to. And I think we are up upon the hour. Thank you so much. I mean, I just don't know how the hour went by. I think, I could have been going for another hour or so, but lovely to have you here. Any parting thoughts to the listeners, either who are live or who see the recording?
No, it's a very crazy time out there across the world. It's going to get crazier. You need to keep your head. You need to think for yourself. Don't get taken in by other people's opinions. Think it through for yourself. When you take your decisions, whether it's money or whether it's life, think the story through for yourself.
Great. And let's all go back and read Let's Talk Money and fill in the Let's Talk Legacy workbook.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.